Good evening. Can you hear me? Yep. Good evening and welcome to the August 29th, 2023 special meeting of the Abington Board of School Directors. I note the attendance of all school board members. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. As this is a special meeting, we're going to move forward with comments from board members and then comments from citizens. Comments from board members will start to my left. Mr. Allen?
Nothing, thank you.
Ms. Frazier?
Welcome, everyone.
Mr. Kay?
Nothing, thank you.
Dr. Mowry?
Nothing, thank you.
Thank you. Ms.
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Muhammad?
Nothing, thank you.
Ms. Fazey?
Nothing, thank you.
Dr. Kleiman?
Nothing, thank you.
Dr. Fetcher?
I just want to say welcome to everyone this evening. I believe that tonight's feasibility study will kind of paint a picture of where the district's needs are in the next 5 to 10 years. And so I think it's important that many members of our community are here. And I just want to thank everyone for your time this evening and for accommodating a special meeting at the end of the summer. Thank you.
Indeed, I want to thank you for those of you who are here in person as well as those who are watching virtually. This is a very important meeting. Your voices are very important as this has the potential to be a very big budget item. So thank you for your attendance. And we will move forward with comments from citizens. The Abington Board of School Directors has convened this evening's meeting at the middle school and the public is welcome. In consideration of the health and safety of the school community, this meeting is also being broadcast live on the Abington School District YouTube channel. The meeting is being recorded and will be accessible on the district's website channel and cable channel no later than Friday, September 1st, 2023, to allow those members of the public who cannot participate to view the proceeding at a later time. Comments from citizens regarding the Abington School District Facilities Feasibility Study will be conducted in person and by phone. Information regarding participating remotely in public comment will be displayed on the screen at the time of public comment. The board thanks the public in advance for its cooperation, and I am going to ask pardon me for 1 second. I'm going to ask Mr. O'Donoghue, where are you? I'm sorry, I can't find you. Thank you. In regard to tonight, since it is a special board meeting, some members of the community may be confused about our authority to recommend or request that tonight's public comment be solely on this because this is the only orientation. Can you provide clarification as to why we are able to do that?
Sure. The board policy regarding meetings, which references 2 public comment periods for any matters that may come before the board, refers to regular meetings. This is a special meeting. It's also a special meeting that has a specific limited purpose. It is and no planned board action. So you are limiting the public comment to the matters that are or may be before the board this evening, which are limited to the facility study that is going to be presented this evening. So there is no issue with the policy or with the Sunshine Act. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. We want to make sure we're always operating in decency and in order. With that being said, the phone number to participate in public comment is featured. Do we have it featured on the screen for them?
Yep.
Thank you. It's featured on the screen behind me. It is 267-715-3717, and you may call in on your mobile. Pardon me for 1 second.
The agenda is listed as orientation first, and then once set of public comments, and then the ability for the agenda items, another set of public comments. So if there are no agenda items brought up by the board, then we go into a second set of comments. So essentially, we have two sets of comments.
Thank you for the clarification. At this time, we're going to have the orientation on the feasibility study, and that will follow, followed by 2 public comments. Thank you for your patience. My fellow board members, please join me on the first seat so our backs are not towards the presentation.
Okay, all right, thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you for having us here this evening. The objective is to really present the results of the better part of 6 months of work by a lot of team members and a lot of staff members, a lot of the district administration, staff, everyone, pulling information together so that we can give an accurate picture of what are the state of the facilities here in Abington. Let me introduce the team. So I'm Phil Solomon. I'm the regional manager of ICS. I have with me Tim Geider, director of engineering, Bill Slaughter, director of construction, David Schrader, who owns Schrader Group Architecture, Danielle Hoffer, who's also at Schrader Group, and 2 other Schrader Group members as well. This comprises a good portion of the team that helped put this together. Oops, sorry. Okay, sorry about that, a little technical. There we go. I can use this instead of that. So the agenda tonight is really to give a high-level summary of our findings. There's a full report you can find that is available for public review. That's got a lot more data in here. Here, we're just trying to give you the high-level overview and then answer any questions. We have a good amount of information. We'll go through it relatively quickly. We're going to try to keep it to 30 minutes. That seems like a lot, but there's a lot to unpack. So we'll go through kind of the assessment process, some of the data snapshots that we pulled together or culled together to kind of see the district on a district-wide scale. We'll use some snapshots like facility condition indexing, which we'll talk a little bit about, look at what the projected enrollment is here at Abington, and then also look at the capacity. What capacity do you have for the future enrollment that you're expecting? We'll talk about education and programming. David will give quite an in-depth piece about how they go through the programming process and come up with the amount of square footage necessary. Then we'll talk a little bit about some examples of how you may address need. These aren't options, they're just examples. Then we'll talk a little bit about some of the best practices and some recommended next steps. So that's kind of the framework for this evening. So the assessment process is kind of 3 big blocks. It's gather data. So this is all the existing studies that you've done, your building plans. We survey a lot of staff. We talk to a lot of building principals. We ask what the needs are. We don't just look at things with our lens. We look at it with everybody's lens. We try to digest that, pull that all together. Then we take all that information and we start walking all your buildings. So we go through, we look at the condition of equipment, how the maintenance of it, how old is it, and how is it operating. So we take all of that and we start to distill it into workbooks. These are big workbooks of data, which help us to identify all the need throughout the whole district. That is not the plan. That's just a starting point for plan. That's just data. So that data then forms the basis for planning. So that's kind of where we are now. We have the data and we have the baselines, and then this is the starting point of the plan, not the end of the plan. So a lot of times there's a misperception of that. So taking a step back, so what were some of the observations that we saw? So the first one, and it's not going to be a surprise to many, at this building, the middle school, there's heavy renovations are going to be required to keep it in good working order as this moves forward. Many of them are code related, meaning that's just what the code is today versus what the code was when it was built. So I'm sure that's not a surprise to many people. In addition to that, though, there's significant need at the elementary schools. I know a lot of them are considered newer or new, but they're aging. And when they age, things like the HVAC systems, roofing, all of those have needs. As things age, they start to reach the end of their useful life, and then they'll need to be addressed. As you would think with aging buildings, there's a lot of opportunity for energy savings. So we did benchmarking across the district to see, okay, how much energy is the district consuming versus what it would consume if it had newer, more up-to-date modern systems. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We did a full demographic analysis, so that's looking at, where has the district been over the last 10 years? What is in development for residential construction? What are the population trends and people, live births, and all of these different things to project out 10 years, the expected enrollment at the district. With that, you always couple that with what's called a capacity analysis. That's how many students can you effectively educate in the facilities that you have today. So those two things come together, and you have kind of a little bit of a gap analysis. Okay, do we have enough space to educate the future students? And if not, what are we going to do about it? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we did a high-level review of just financial. So obviously, in the coffers, in your capital reserves, there's probably not enough money to address all the needs that you have. So we're going to have to talk a little bit about what are some other ways that the district could fund something like this. So this will be the first of the kind of eye charts. This is just a big high-level view of the district. And what you're looking at is really just kind of the name of the building, what it serves, how big is it, the original construction year. So the reason we look at original construction year, it's kind of like a vintage. So when something's built in the 60s, it represents a lot of times the educational philosophy of the 60s or the 90s or what have you. So a lot of times the footprint is very representative of an age of education. Then we look at, when is the last time that building was renovated? And the reason we look at that is buildings, systems, subsystems have a useful life. You can make them live longer than their expected life by maintaining them more and more and more. But at some point, it's good money after bad. Usually about 25 years, the building starts to feel aged and the systems start to break down more often. You'll see more maintenance, more repairs, all of those things. As you're approaching that time, that's a good time to start planning and thinking about how are we going to address this over the next 10 years? Because that's the planning window. It's not today. It's always like today plus 10 years. That's what you're looking forward to. So the last column that we have here is replacement value. So if somehow we were able to just erase the buildings as they stand today and then rebuild them in their exact footprint, what would that cost? And that's what this column represents. So when you sum these together, you can see that the district is managing over $800 million worth of assets. That's a big number. That requires a lot of maintenance, it requires a lot of repair, and a lot of reinvestment. So I like to bring that together just so everybody has a good high-level view of where is the district today. The next piece is, we'll go into a little bit of a deep dive. And this was middle school focused, but we didn't want it just to be middle school. Like whenever you're planning, you want to think of all the different components that you might need in the future. But these are the subsystems that we went through specifically here to get a good feel for what the need is. And David's going to walk us through kind of what we found.
Okay, thanks, Phil. So we said we're going to look at all the buildings, but right now we're going to look at the middle school. So let's focus on that one for a little bit. A couple things to start this off. This building is a safe building. It is still functioning. All of the systems are functioning. So when we start to look at those issues, and on top of that, it's well cared for. And those three components have allowed it to live the life that it has. So when we look at a building like this, we start to look at two other things, and that is efficiency and service life of the systems. And so if you kind of keep those two in mind, those drive the rest of what we talk about here. And I don't want to create vintages, but think about it this way. I have to think about it with my own age. 1962 is a 61-year-old building, okay? And Phil just talked about the systems that start to fail at 20, 25, and 30 years. You had renovations and additions in 1974. That's 49 years ago. It's amazing how time flies. And finally, you had the science wing addition in 1996, which is 27 years ago. So there's one more thing that coincides with, remember the 1996 version, and that is Americans with Disability. So we all talk about the buildings and Americans with Disabilities. We go through facilities and look at how they help or do not help the folks who have need in the building. And the ADA was enacted in 1990, again, remember the 1996 year, and it was effective in 1992. So you'll see portions of the 96 building actually comply with the requirements of that, and other portions of the building don't. But when you have a building that does not have ADA capabilities, it does not need to be upgraded until the building is upgraded in general. So that's something to keep in mind. The other note that I would start from the prior slide, mentioned 2 slides ago, mentioned code issues. So when the building was built, the building complied with all code requirements. Code requirements are enacted or reenacted every 4 years or so, and each of the states takes into account whichever effective code that they wish to. And so this building was code compliant. If you were to rebuild it today, it's not. So when we as architects and engineers walk through these buildings, we have to look at them as if they were built today and do all of our judgment based upon that. And so that's kind of the starting point to this. And I know that was a long lead-in, but I wanted to make sure people understand that. So when our group walked around and we had architects and engineers looking through the whole facility, there were a series of site projects that should be looked at. You do have concrete walls, stone walls, and things like that that are starting to settle and move around a little bit. One of the major elements for us when we're looking at that first note that I mentioned, which is efficiency and service life, is the building envelope. So in that case, you can look at the original building portions and you see roofs that are 30 years old and plus. You also see window systems that are single pane window systems, and I know that all of you, when you have the opportunity in your homes, either build with double pane, some may build with triple pane, but when you upgrade, you definitely go to double pane. And certainly when you look at the window in the roof, you can see areas where you could definitely improve efficiency and service life. This is the slide that is kind of related to the ADA comment that I made, the 1990 and 1992 ADA. And as you go through a building like this, you see door systems, elevators, tiered spaces, bathrooms, and items like that that are non-compliant. It gets down to within a classroom where a counter does not have capability for a person with mobility issues to get underneath a sink. And that's something that you'll find throughout the building as you go. One interesting thing about the little theater that you're sitting in, you happen to see each of these doors as you come down the ramps on the side. You also see that the doors are cut at an angle. Doors are supposed to have a landing space outside of them for today's compliance. And so that's a challenge for ADA compliance, but it works, and it worked when the building was built. When we look at the interior finishes, this is a service life issue as well. So you look at things like, we like to use acronyms here, so that's what you're seeing up on the slide. VCT is vinyl composition tile. So the tile flooring is dated. The ACT is acoustic ceiling tile is dated and in need of replacement in many places. And you'll notice, particularly in the center stair towers of the building, you'll see something called a 1x1 glue applied tile. So that would need to be replaced as well. And then you have, interesting to see, this building was built in a very unique fashion. It is something that's meant to be very transformative. And so they use these metal panel wall systems throughout the classroom corridors. And you probably know that those are becoming dated and probably need replacement as well. So those are all of the systems that we look at when we look at the buildings. In addition to that, we look at things like building hardware and the equipment throughout the facility. Many of the issues there become functional at some point, and you can think about something like a bleacher system in a gym that does not work as well as it used to and becomes more of a challenge. But there are also ADA compliance issues with things like that as well. So you have to look at those elements when you look through a facility. Heating, ventilating, air conditioning, and air handling. Your central plants were recently replaced, so heating and cooling function at the center part of the building. But all of your heating and cooling within each of your spaces is delivered through something that we call a terminal unit. It's whatever's at the end of the system that gives you the heating and cooling there. In many parts of the building, those items are dated, aged, and would definitely function better if they were new systems. Same thing with controls throughout the building. So just trying to give you an overall sense of several thousand line items that were compiled for this building alone from the engineers and architects who walked through. When you look at the electrical systems, the good news is that the building had new building service and main distribution panel replaced back in 2020. So that gives the building the capability of functioning with the higher power source and new power sources that it needs. But from that point on, the spaghetti of wire that runs through the building and provides the power throughout the structure is in need of replacement at this point. Same with lighting. Most of you are probably trying to replace your light bulbs with LED light bulbs, both for durability and for the fact that they use less electricity. And the same thing would go for a building like this, and that's very important to this. And then finally, plumbing and fire safety. The systems throughout the building start to degrade as time goes on. The last line item mentions the building is not sprinklered. And I will tell you that that does not become a safety issue for the occupants. It essentially becomes an asset protection issue. And so that's what that is essentially made for. In a building like this that was built of masonry, you probably have a lot less issue with not having sprinklers, but current code requires sprinklers. So if you did replace the building or renovate the building, you would include sprinklers. I think that's the shortened version.
It is. All right, so after our teams went through the middle school and you could see all those items that we've noted, we also provided cost estimates for what that would look like to replace those systems. We pulled that together with the elementary school information that we had, and we needed a way to really rate and prioritize, which buildings need the most need. So we use what's called a facility condition index. Basically what that is the total amount of deferred maintenance divided by the replacement value, which Phil had on one of the earlier slides of the building. We look at this over 5 years, and then we started with this slide looking at it district-wide, and then we wanted to peel out the high school because the high school just underwent this major renovation, so very little need from that perspective. And what you can see is district-wide, you're in the fair condition range with an EFCI 5, and when you take the high school out, you bump up to the 41%, which is kind of bumping the whole district minus the high school into the poor range. We're going to look at this more on a building by building basis on the next slide. So here, clearly the middle school is kind of approaching that 80% mark, EFCI, and followed by Rydell West and Rydell East elementary schools. And then the majority of the other elementary schools have moved into that fair category. You can see the orange bars with McKinley, the third one from the right, approaching the poor condition as well. Whenever we do facility reviews and reviews for performance, we also like to look at energy and energy usage. So here we performed a energy benchmark, which is basically taking all electricity used and natural gas used for the facilities, converting them to BTUs, and then dividing by the square footage. So a lower energy utilization index, or EUI, is better for the building in terms of energy efficiency. We broke this up into traditional boiler and chiller system, buildings with boilers and chillers, and geothermal buildings, because they have different targets for EUIs. The targets we represent with the green lines, the vertical lines there. So basically, if you take the bar charts on the right for each of the schools, and you moved to that vertical bar, that's the potential energy savings that you could see in that building if you underwent a renovation or a project there. And basically, district-wide, this slide's showing that there's considerable energy savings that could be had for the district. Back to Phil.
So sorry, this is a bit of an eye chart, but Tim just kind of showed you district-wide, some of the elementary schools. So we wanted to take a step back and start putting some numbers with the need at the elementary schools. This does not have the middle school in it, obviously not the high school. You just addressed that. But we're going to talk a little bit about the middle school and some options there, some concepts there, and then we'll add that in at the end. But if you were to look at just the need that we found on a year-by-year basis, and this is not a plan, this is just us putting it with kind of the life cycle when the life cycle of certain systems end, we place it into a year. So over the 10 years, at your elementary school level, there's about $110 million in need. Now remember, that's not today, that's over the course of years, but that gives you an idea of the scale of need as the district moves forward. You know, I'm going to switch it to David, because David, this is going to tee up your slide.
Okay, so far what we've done is really looked at the middle school, haven't necessarily spelled out any of the pricing for what needs to be done there, but you've also seen that last chart that showed all of the different costs for the other buildings throughout the district. So you have that information to start as a basis. The next thing that we have to do is to take a look at the enrollment and the capacities of each of these buildings. And so that's what this chart does. This is a little bit challenging, but I'm going to just kind of drive you through it here. You can see this first column are all of the elementary schools, and then there's an elementary school total row here that goes across. Then you have the middle school, and then you have the high school. And of course, the grade configuration is column number 2 here. The third column is the current enrollment as of the 2022-2023 year, and that's that way because we did this back in the spring. So we were dealing with the fall's enrollment projections, actually the actual enrollments at that time. What this says is functional use, and that's Abington School District capacity. What the team did from our office is to work with all of the elementary school principals to understand how the buildings are used. Then we did that with the middle school and the high school, and came up with a true capacity across the district as if all of the spaces were equitably used within the buildings. That's essentially what that column is providing. The next one is from the enrollment projections, and we had an outside group called Future Think do the enrollment projections, and they projected 10 years out. So that's what you're seeing here. You're seeing 2032 and 2033. These are the capacities, or these are the actual enrollments that they anticipate 10 years out. And I think one of the things that anybody on this side of the table here would say is that we have a pretty good sense of what you might see 5 years out. 10 years is a bit of a gamble, but you have to do something to try to figure out what you're doing in buildings, because as you know, building projects take 3 to 5 years minimally. And when a building project might be done, you're already halfway through that 10 years. So that's why we have to use 10 years for lack of a better resource. And that's what the projected enrollment's doing here. We have highlighted Copper Beach for one reason only here. That's only to show you the formula structure that we use. Don't get excited about the fact that it has an oval around it. But this is what we call operating utilization. We like to see elementary schools operating at about 90% utilization because it gives you folks the flexibility within the building to adjust grade structures, capacities in classrooms, and so on. So that's ultimately what we're trying to do. When you do the math for Copper Beach for that projected enrollment 10 years out, and you can see that that enrollment jumps potentially, none of us know for sure, but potentially from 918 to 1,021, if that number holds true, that building is at 95% of its capacity. So I hope that that's a pretty simplistic way of looking at this capacity structure. The good news is it's not over capacity at that point. It does, though, say that if you were trying to reach that 90% capacity, you would probably need another 55 seats in that building. But remember, you have those 55 seats. You just have to figure out where the kids go in the building. That's what that means. So it's not meaning you lost 2 classrooms worth of space. I'm going to drag you down here, but you can also see one more thing that's important. With that enrollment, the elementary school total 10 years out is expected to be around 88%. So you're staying below that 90%. You have capacities in the elementary school. So hopefully that's fairly clear. I'm going to skip the middle school for a second and go to the high school because there's some numbers over here that draw my attention when I look at it. And ultimately, a high school is scaled to be somewhere between 80 and 85% capacity. And you can understand that that's so that the principals have room to allow for those classes that are not occupied at certain times so that you can move students around that building and actually schedule students. The closer you get to 90 or 100%, the more challenging it becomes for that principal to schedule classes through that building. So we tend to look at 80 or 85%, and in this case, 10 years out, that building might feel a little bit tight, but it probably won't because it has so many additional types of spaces and programs that you should feel pretty good in the building. And you can see that the 87% is where you might get to 10 years down the road. So I don't think there's anything to be concerned about here at all. You just finished a beautiful building. Congratulations. It looks like it'll handle that. The middle school, 2,000 current enrollment, and it looks like it could be in the neighborhood of 2,200. So that capacity is one that we would probably suggest adding to the building for. And that's essentially, if you were to do the math exactly and look at the 90% utilization in the middle school, it suggests that you might need to find room for 481 students. Remember everything I've said so far. It doesn't mean you can't fit people in the building. It means it becomes that much more difficult to make that happen. This is a building that we would suggest adding to allow for that capacity to grow in the building. Okay? I guess I had more here. So the next part of that was understanding what the capacity needs were in the building. We started to meet with the middle school principals and discuss what some of the needs might be at the building. They function as a team structure, and the goal for a team structure is a little bit less the linearity of the building that is currently there, because it means that if you're trying to create small learning communities of 125 to 150 students, you can't necessarily gather them in their own little groupings. They're instead along a corridor of space. And so when we try to redesign buildings to accommodate those smaller learning communities, we're thinking about trying to create groupings of students. And I think as you folks look around some of the new middle schools being built and designed, and I should have said designed and built, you'll see that there are a lot of teaming structures built into them. So what that's doing is it is maximizing the instructional time because the students are staying in smaller groupings. It is decreasing the movement throughout the building because, again, they're staying in their groupings. And to some extent, it definitely promotes the collaboration of staff. Another thought process as we talked to the administration in the building was that it would improve lunch period time and instructional time if they were able to modify the cafeteria space to be a little bit more of a collective whole, or to try to provide something that had a little bit more efficient food service lines. So those were some of the points that they brought up. Other items that I think that our team recognized as we looked at the building, and as others were talking about functionality, it would be probably an advantage to this structure to create a little bit more identifiable main entry. The way that the building was built, it was intended to be a filtration of students through and into the common spaces at the ground floor. And where we enter, which is up at the main office, which has just a double door, and then you turn right and go through another double door, that was never meant to be a large access point to the building when it was designed. So an identifiable main entry, some kind of student commons, which you're starting to find in structures today as you look more and more at the newer buildings, and then these team areas that I just mentioned. You're in a performing arts space right now, so there was a discussion about potential improvements to these kinds of spaces, this and the surrounding spaces, and then phys ed and athletic and support spaces of a size for the student body size that the building might eventually have. So those were all things that folks talked about. We met in several different sessions, and the chart on the left is only to highlight that we probably had 12 pages and, again, multiple hundreds of lines of spaces called out that eventually suggested that a new building for a capacity of 2,200 students might be in the neighborhood of 345, and that's probably too tight of a number. It probably means it's a 340 to 350,000 square foot building to accommodate that student body. The existing building that you're sitting in right now is in the neighborhood of 300,000 square feet. So you can see that the square footage needed for a building to satisfy the 2,200 students kind of correlates with that excess number of student spaces that we shared with you on the last slide for capacity. You need that much more space to accommodate that many more students. And with that, I will hand it back to Phil.
Okay, so we've now gone through the needs that we've identified at the middle school from a deferred maintenance standpoint. And we've also noted the needs that you have in the elementary school levels. Can you do nothing, and is doing nothing an option? So if nothing is done right now, you will be running your systems to failure. And when you do that, you typically, when they do fail, you replace them on an emergency basis. And when it's an emergency basis, it could be a little bit more costly, and it could also impact education. So I'll give you an example. If a boiler fails and you can't heat the building, you can't run the school until you repair or replace the boiler. When they are replaced, they're typically replaced in a like-for-like manner, and you basically give up the opportunity to improve on efficiency, improve on the configuration of the system. So it's not ideal. And at some point in the future, if you do renovate the building, that cost to replace that system is sunk at that point. We're going to go through a little exercise with where the building system ages are today across the district and where they would be in 5 years from now. But before we do that, there are some industry standards out there. So ASHRAE is defined there, American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers, and also BOMA, which is the Building Operations or Building Owners and Managers Association. So they publish median service lives for different building systems. We've highlighted a few here on the slide that pertain to Abington schools. So 40 years for geothermal well field, 15 to 30 years for a boiler system, depending on configuration, 30 years for windows, for a couple examples. So this shows your district systems and their ages as they sit today. You can see the HVAC systems are kind of clumped on the left-hand side and broken up into primary heating, primary cooling, air distribution, and then moving to the right, you have windows and roofing systems. So the short of it is the dark blue represents systems that are well past their useful life. We're going to look at the same chart in a minute after 5 years of doing nothing. So you can see here, many more systems go to dark blue and are well past their rated life. And it's our recommendation that it's time to really start making a plan and prioritizing the needs within the district and trying to address those. Now, Phil is going to speak to some of the options and examples for the middle school.
Yeah, and these are really examples. They're really not options. We're at the beginning of the process, not the end. So, as part of this feasibility study, they said, well, how could you address the system? So what are some logical ways to do that? Well, you could look at the building and you could just refresh the systems as they stand. And for each of these, there's going to be advantages and disadvantages. One may cost less, solve some needs. Some may cost more and solve all the needs. But you're going to have to go through a process, or the district's going to have to go through the process of figuring out what's the optimal solution here. So the first logical one is, okay, we could just keep the building as it is and just refresh the systems as we go. The second one is, as David said, you know that there's more student enrollment coming. Maybe you could just add to this building and reconfigure it a little bit and do the refresh, and it would be sufficient. So that would be a solution. An additional solution would be, okay, well, maybe we're going to change the building so much that it makes more sense to build a new building, and that could be a solution. Now, one of the things that we had discussed, and we had a lot of input from teachers and principals, but a lot of the comments were the building feels too big. Now, the teaming model tries to solve that, but maybe an option would be 2 buildings instead of 1. That would be reconfiguring the district. So these are all very big decisions. And like I said, we're at the very beginning of this. One of the things as we worked through this that the administration, the superintendent, and the board was adamant about is that this would be a community-based process. They would be asking for input from stakeholders, from community members, from all the people who live and work here to say, hey, what do we need to do? So these aren't options, as I said. These are ideas. We're not going to go too far into them, but one of the things, they are all large investments. You know, you can see these examples range from $175 million to almost $300 million, depending on, you know, how you do this. And again, these are just for the examples that we put together, but we had to give an order of magnitude for how big the problem is. So that gives a high level look. Now, as we pull this information together, and I'll pull everything together kind of at the very end, all the numbers together. One of the things you haven't seen yet is really addressing playgrounds, athletic fields. That will be an estimate pulled into the final number of kind of what the magnitude is. All of that's critical to education. We were focused more on the building, but don't think we're forgetting about the other stuff. There is others that need to be addressed. So as you begin this process, you know, this isn't moving forward. There we go, sorry. So, you know, as we begin this process, and we've worked with many, many school districts, what are the elements of really a great plan? So, you know, one, you want to start with detailed and accurate information, and you have that. I mean, as David referred to, thousands of line items of data. We've tried to pull them together in snapshots, but there's tons of data that's available for this decision-making process. Detailed, accurate demographic projections. We certainly feel comfortable in the demographic projections. This is not an area where there's lots of farmland and you're building out these giant, you know, Toll Brothers developments. You have a lot of churn, but this district is I guess it's attractive to young families because you're bucking the trend of people having less kids because your enrollment is growing. So even though people are having less kids, people with, you know, young families are moving here at a reasonable rate too. So you're looking at about a 5%, 6% increase over 10 years. That's a good problem to have. That means you're a growing district, you're a vibrant district. So your demographic projections are done and they're accurate. Aligned with a long-term educational vision. You're using modern educational theory here. So teaming structure in the middle school. So you have good educational vision. Now we're just looking to match that up with your assets. The pieces that you see that are in bold, you know, are things that need to be dug into. So match the funds with the improvements. You know, that's critical. What can you afford? What can the community afford? Include a wide variety of stakeholder input. You know, I visit here, you live here. So those are different things. We want to gather, or the district wants to gather as much input as they can to help make this decision. It's a community changing decision. So it makes sense to reach out to the community to help make that decision. Now, I don't have the other two, but they are critical also. Logical, clear, data-driven decision making. A lot of times what happens is you start to pull this data together and the right plan is uncovered. It's not like somebody's great solution. It's like, oh, we followed the data and now this is what makes the most sense. This is the optimal plan. And then the last piece, I should have this bolded too, but the process is clearly communicated throughout the process. So there's a very open, transparent, two-way dialogue going on as the decision making is being made. So these are in our estimate, this is what great facilities plans look like. They check all the boxes. Sorry, the keyboard just doesn't want to work with me. There we go, sorry. I'll use this one. So as we pull everything together, you know, there was a big range of, you know, everything from just renovating or just replacing systems all the way up to, you know, building 2 new buildings. You know, those are a wide range of options, and there's everything in between. But just to pull all that together, you're looking at a little over $300 million up to $425 million of need. Those are big numbers. That's not today's though, that's over 10 years. But the choices that are made will set the path of the district probably for the next 30 to 40 years, because that's how long buildings live. I mean, this school has lived even longer than that. You know, so you're really thinking about how is the district going to look all the way out to 50 years from now. And the choices are going to be right in front of you. So what are some of the first steps that need to really be made? So critical to this is a financial analysis. Obviously, you would work with your financial advisors to look at, what is your available capital reserves funds? Can you use a lot of those? How much of those do we need to keep in the bank to keep our bond rating? All these kind of critical elements work together. What are our debt obligations? When do these roll off? Is it going to free up cash? When is that going to be available? So a lot of these are timing related. What can we do under the Act? Act 1 is the taxing authority of the district. What can we do under that to help support this? And then what impact does that have as we peel those dollars off into the overall budget and operations? All these things are working together because a lot of things have competing interests. All of them are important, but they got to be prioritized into what is most important and where are we going to put our dollars. So there are other funding pathways available, what we call electoral debt. That's AKA referendums to the public. So for something of this scale, we would recommend the district look at all these different pathways and then really do the pros and cons of all of them. And there'll be some optimum solution that, a financial person, I'm an engineer, will help figure out, not me. From that, though, you can start to put together a financial gap analysis. I call it a gap analysis because there's almost always more need than there is funding. It's just a fact of life. So choices always have to be made. So how do you make those choices? Well, what the district is saying is they would like to have this as a dialogue and a conversation. So you have kind of this iterative process of, okay, here's what we have, here's what we can afford, here's what the community wants, and it's a back and forth kind of dialogue as this thing gets uncovered to the perfect or optimal plan. So we'll talk a little bit about how input gets taken in a second, and then obviously you're gonna scale these down into some logical options for the board to consider. Because sometimes there's more than one way to solve the problem, and there's advantages and disadvantages to each of those ways. And that's where, the tough job of somebody choosing that has to come to. So I talked about this iterative process. So what does that look like? So there's a lot that needs to be done from here moving forward, obviously, but the first thing is a great communications plan. So how are we going to communicate out to the public? How are we going to get input from the public? But there would be formal input. So that's both scientific surveys, online surveys, these special tools that you can use that are like this collaborative conversation. And I forget the software that we use, but it's super slick and it's very good at distilling out public opinion. In addition to things like that, there would be listening sessions. Listening sessions are kind of a two-way thing. It's a little bit of an education for the people who show up, and then it's input. Hey, what do you think? And then you gather all the input, you distill that into some key bullets and some key ideas. This would happen not only at the community and the internal with the teachers, with the administrators. There's a whole host of input that's needed when you're making a big decision like this. As that iterative process is moving forward, as I said before, we'll evaluate educational impact versus cost versus, opportunity costs, all these kind of different things, and then distill it down to, we say 2 to 5. A lot of times there will be one solution that just rises to the top and just is a clear winner. Other times there's 2 or maybe 3 solutions that rise to the top, and then choices need to be made. That is the end of our prepared material. So I know that was a lot. We are certainly happy to answer questions if the board chooses to have us answer them.
Thank you very much. At this time, Justin, clarification, board for the special meeting, comments from the board or only comments from the community? Thank you. I appreciate that. Again, we always want to make sure we operate in decency and order. There is no pride component here. Thank you very much. Questions or comments from my fellow board members now? The mics are open, and if not, we will go to our community members.
I'd like to just say, just as a reminder of what was said, is how we're right at the beginning of this process. You know, this is a lot of information that we all have to absorb, a new way of looking at it. I've lived in this district a long time. I went here, and so I understand back in the day the complaints and concerns and worries we had in all the different buildings at different times. But I just want to remind people that this is honestly just the beginning. Nothing has been decided on any level. It's just the conversation, which is why we want you to get more of the citizens involved, to alert them to what is being talked about and get their opinions and points of view as the time goes by.
Excellent. Any additional questions or comments?
I have a question. Thank you. I have a question about sort of the information that may be included as part of this process. So the presentation that we saw today gave some important information about energy efficiency in the buildings. But I don't think that anyone is unaware of the mounting effects of climate change. And I guess one thing I'm wondering about is there a way to incorporate climate resiliency or durability into the decision-making process?
That's a great question, and the answer is yes. So, you know, Tim gave a little bit about efficiency, but that efficiency goes a lot deeper than just that. That's a snapshot of like where you are today, but it's actually a great time to be looking at, you know, renovation. There's the Inflation Reduction Act, and that really is a funding mechanism, an additional funding mechanism to take the district from wherever you are now, not only to be more efficient, but it also rewards and gives money if you can take the extra step and go renewable. So, and we're working with multiple clients now that are looking at things like geothermal technology, solar technology, and you know, where those things may not have had a break-even point that was acceptable financially in the past, the IRA, or Inflation Reduction Act, is really moving that needle inwards. So in just about any piece that we're going to be evaluating, we have the data necessary right now to start running those analyses as well. So that will certainly be a component of this. And as that rises up as maybe a desire of the community and the board, you know, we can start to bear down on that as we get more and more towards options, if you will. So then you start to build, okay, what's the educational need? What are some of the efficiency things? And we'll come up with, you know, the community, the board, will come up with priorities of what you're looking for, and we'll make sure we're hitting on all of those as we're developing these options. But it's a great question, and it's a great time to be looking at that.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have a question, and I don't, Dr. Fetcher, this might be more appropriate for you or for you folks over there, I'm not sure, but can you just talk a little bit about the process for community engagement? I know that you all have had experience working with other school districts, and I know, Dr. Fetcher, this is an important component of this process for you, but if you could just sort of describe what that means practically, I think that would be helpful.
So following this, this meeting and moving into our next meeting, I believe that there will be some recommendations from the administration in terms of next steps. One recommendation that I would propose at our next meeting is to engage ICS to further engage ICS to continue the discussion and hold community forums for input and various ways to get input from our community members. In terms of what other next steps as well, I think that is something that would be designed by first starting with that area of focus groups, surveys, those types of things in order to get that input from the community and all of our stakeholders in this community. This is and will be definitely a community-based decision-making process, as this is a huge impact on our community and requires a lot of support from our community. So the initial step of this is not a district-driven decision-making process. This is a gathering of information and input from our community, and needs to be that way because our schools are central in our community. Our schools and our buildings in our schools have a huge impact, not only for the students who attend, but our communities as well. And that being said, that is why it needs to remain a community-driven process.
I have a few questions. So on slide 8, where there's a list of the middle school building systems, is that list in order of priority for addressing need, or it just was, what is the significance of that list?
No, it's really not in, it's really all your subsystems of the building into categories. So they're certainly not prioritized. I'm sorry, they probably should be bullets, not numbers, but
Okay.
they're not really prioritized.
I see. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. And then you spoke at length about accessibility and ADA compliance issues throughout the middle school building. I was curious to understand, this is probably more for Dr. Fetcher or the folks who work here, what is the current state of the student experience as it relates to students that may have physical disabilities and have challenges navigating the school?
In terms of each building, we do have areas of buildings that need improvement, and when those areas do come to attention, or if there's a way to adjust our current footprint, we do that. I can give an example, and I recently spoke with a parent who expressed concerns about our access into our parking lot at the senior high school. If you drive by currently, you will notice that there's concrete work being done due to aging concrete and a surface that is not acceptable for anyone who may be in a wheelchair in order to go down through a ramp and pass into the parking lot. When those issues are brought to our attention, and that concrete that is currently being fixed is most likely from 1956 and in need of repair, and it was not in the footprint of the construction project on the outside of the perimeter of the building. So those types of matters come to our attention. We make adjustments where we can. There are structures within some of the buildings that prevent us from making the accommodations that I would say should be there. And I think that we could, if you look specifically at the feasibility study and the major document associated with the feasibility study for this building, there are some footprint limitations in terms of code that at the time when the building was built met code, but if this were a brand new building would not meet that code. And we try to ensure that we can do whatever we can within the limits of our facilities, but ultimately it comes back to, for me, student access is essential, and also for our community members who come into our buildings. So there are things that need to be changed in our buildings, and that process will continue, and we reevaluate that process. Another example, you've heard about our playgrounds. We are in the process of ensuring that there's more accessibility to our playgrounds. Quite frankly, at this point, they're not where I would like to see them for our student body. And so that is a process that we are looking at, transforming our playgrounds to make them more accessible for our students, and not just to be able to be in a location as other students, but also to be able to engage in meaningful play with other students as well. So in short, not everything is perfect. We continue to work toward ensuring that there is an increased access, and we will continue to do that as well.
Thank you. On slide 20, there is a recommendation to establish clearly designated team areas. And I know there was also data gathered that the space feels too big by some teachers and folks that work in the school. I'm curious to understand how the middle school is currently organized in terms of spaces, and do we not currently have team areas, or how much are students moving in and throughout the building?
Dr. Fetcher, I can handle one of those. So the question that you had about being too big, I heard how that was said, and folks who are looking at the building as being too big, it doesn't mean the space is too big. It means that their perception of how many students are gathering in that building might be too big in one place. That was the comment that was made. Related to teaming is generally, at least when it's being designed around today, it consists of 4 to 6 classrooms that are servicing 125 to 150 students, and usually some kind of teaming space in the middle of that allows that group to stay in almost a house structure to do the things that they're doing during the primary classes of the day. And then they move out into the specialty spaces. And so that's the kind of thing that you'll see as you look at the newer buildings that are being designed. I believe you're doing the teaming in terms of the teachers working together. It's just a question of whether you have the physical spaces to gather the students as a small learning community within that.
Okay, thank you. And then later on slide 26, you listed equipment need. Yes. Do you have a sense of the most critical equipment that needs to maintain functionality for the buildings to, to be able to keep students in the buildings and to have them be here, learning?
So to be clear, the systems are functioning, so it's not that the systems aren't operating. What this is showing is that there is a rated life in these systems. So you can think of it as like a bell curve, right? Like a lot of these systems, they'll live to 20 or 25 years, but what you'll start to see is then they'll start to fail, like 1 or 2. And then as you push it further and further, they'll start to fail more and more and more. So as you get to the more blue portions, at some point you're kind of rebuilding your car one component at a time. That's really expensive. You might want to just get the whole thing new, because to rebuild it one piece at a time from the hardware store, whatever, or the auto parts store, is very costly. So what you're seeing is you're always looking at your core systems. I think of HVAC, heart and lungs of your building. Those things are kind of critical, right? You need to get fresh air, you need to get all these other things. And any domino effect, like you can't have your roof leaking. Water in a building is destructive, and it's destructive and very costly as it moves through a building. So when I think of priorities, I think of, the heart and lungs, and then I think of things with domino effects. Domino effects being one thing fails and other things are now going to fail because of it. When you look at ages, I would just rate them like that. So HVAC and then domino effect issues. But that doesn't discount the fact that even if those things are not domino effect, you still could be putting kind of good money after bad if you're just replacing a piece. I don't know if that answered your question. It's kind of roundabout.
No, that was helpful. That was helpful additional information. Thank you.
May I just ask a clarifying question? So
Sure.
in terms of, my understanding of the ages of the systems, these are approximate lifespans, correct?
Correct. So,
And, the one example I think of is, our high school from 1956 had the same boiler until a year or 2 years ago.
Yep.
And so that, I'm assuming, went well beyond the...
well past, yeah.
the,
well
the
past
life.
it.
So in considering these types of repairs and projects over time, these are a guideline
Correct.
for us to follow, also to assist us in budgeting for the future. But by no means are they prescriptive of, in 5 years, we need to do this.
Yeah, failure of systems is inherently unknowable. Like you said, like that boiler probably was rated for, now old boilers could be 40 years, but you got 55 years out of it or what have you. Doesn't mean you didn't have to put a lot of money into it to make that happen, but the decisions weren't made maybe to replace it at an earlier time because you weren't doing a major renovation. When you are doing a major renovation, obviously that's the time to kind of reset that clock and make sure all the components are new, or as many as possible, so you're not kind of getting this, money out the door on things that, pieces are failing. Pieces of the systems are failing.
Thank you.
And then my last question is regarding slide 27. I know that you said that these are examples and not necessarily recommendations, but I'm curious with the first bullet point where there's that range of dollar amount, is that to be taken as to the left is sort of the least expensive
It's true.
option versus?
That's
Yeah.
that's essentially how it works.
Okay.
Yeah, we're kind of going and escalating costs as these concepts are kind of laid out, and that was one of the things that was asked for in the feasibility study. Give us an idea of the cost to address these needs in different formats, and it gives you got a kind of an order of magnitude, so we could start this conversation.
I see. Thank you.
Any additional?
In relation to how the terminology we're using to describe certain things, during the area where you're saying is doing nothing an option, one of the areas that I'd like us to explore a little bit more, or you can tell me if this is possible, is if you leave things as they are, how much money are we wasting keeping these systems going and like the inefficiency of the buildings? I always think of, you can keep your house really warm and comfortable even with the window open if you turn the heat up enough, but you're wasting all this money. And I'm wondering, I'm sure you find that there's wastefulness here, but how much are we wasting? Like if we had a new system put in, that would cost a lot of money, but the amount we're paying to maintain it goes way down. Is that where we are now? Like, are we?
Yeah,
just
the energy side is easy to figure out. Like we have those targets, and we can basically figure that out. The other side is a little harder. Like you're replacing these $20 system or $50 system or $5,000 system on a regular basis. We can certainly get that data by pulling work order systems and everything else. Today, I don't have a feel for how much money that is, but you'd have to add in kind of the emergency repair money with kind of the ongoing maintenance money to kind of get that idea. Now, typically, you're not going to find that just by having new buildings, you're going to self-fund it. It just doesn't work like that because it's so much capital that you're putting forward, and you're doing it for multiple reasons. You're changing it educationally as well as addressing the older systems. But we can certainly try to get, we'll say, an order of magnitude for that. Very hard to nail that down exactly, but like kind of show you how we did it and show you our work maybe, and then that would give you a kind of an idea for those numbers, certainly.
Any additional questions or comments?
Yes, of the 4 options to refresh, renovate, rebuild, or to create 2 middle schools, what would instruction look like during those scenarios?
It's a great question. Yeah, so when it would look very different for the different options, right? So when you're going to renovate, let's say we're going to renovate this building as is. So that means you really are not building any new space. So you would have to get portable modular classrooms to rotate students out of as you're building through phases of the building. And you would come up with logical phases that have the least educational impact, but there's no way it can be done without educational impact at all. You know, there would have to be movement in the building, chunks of the building would have to be renovated. It would be what's called an occupied renovation. And you can manage it in such a way that you minimize those impacts, but there'll still be impacts. Now, as you move to the right, renovate, add, when you're adding space, you can use that in some cases as your swing space. So now you've added, let's say you put an addition on, and you can move students there and then phase around the building. That can be a solution to the problem. If you're building new, obviously, as long as you're not tearing this building down and building in exactly the same spot, you're building it new somewhere else, obviously that's got very little educational impact because you're building it somewhere else. This building operates until it's done, switch over. Same thing with 2 middle schools. Now, this doesn't take into account, there's a whole bunch of solutions. Let's say the district and community decided we want 2 smaller sized middle schools. It may not be 2 new ones. Maybe there would be the biggest elementary school becomes one. There's all these different iterations of how you can do that when you're reconfiguring that we would have to come up with the advantages, disadvantages, timelines. All of these things you're asking are all the pieces that you use. That's the data that you follow to make the best decision. So yeah, it's the question. I'm sorry, I answered it very long because I know this is a simple question, but it's got a big answer because that's stuff that you should be weighing.
Additional questions or comments?
So on slide 30, in terms of this process, I heard the time frame of like 3 to 5 years thrown out for a new building being built. But before we can, I guess, embark on that timeline, I see that this timeline's our next steps for community input and coming up with plans. I don't know if this is for you folks or for Dr. Fetcher, what is the timeline for this slide to get to the output of a few options with a financial plan?
So sometimes they say it depends and people hate that, but it does. So it can be as little as 6 months of a process to a full year of a process. And it just depends on, how much input, how much alignment starts to develop as you get input. Sometimes as I said before, the solution just becomes so clear that everybody just aligns behind it. Sometimes there may be competing kind of options, if you will, even within the community, kind of debating it themselves. Well, I'd rather have this, or maybe this is better. And you have to kind of facilitate that discussion a little bit until something becomes clear. So my gut says 6 months to a year. You hope it's going to be earlier, but sometimes it drags out.
Given that Dr. Fetcher's recommendation is that you help us with the consensus building, the community input, can you speak towards your experience with consensus building amongst the community?
Sure. I mean, between ICS and Schroeder Group, that's what we do, So we actually just worked in tandem at Coatesville Area School District to get consensus in about 6-month format on a total reconfiguration of their district that was passed unanimously. That had a large steering committee. That was one way to do this, was via steering committee. There's other pieces that we would pull into that as well. We talked about those input sessions. So a lot of this is small group input. So you're kind of educating as well as taking input. But we've done that here, Haven Grove, Upper Dublin, Springford, a lot of districts like your neighbors. We've kind of worked through some of these processes to come to good consensuses with. Not sure if that answers your question.
It does.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments from the board? Thank you. At this time, we'll move forward with comments from citizens. Comments from citizens regarding the Abington School District Facilities Feasibility Study are being conducted both in person and by phone. The phone number to participate in public comment is 267-715-3717. And is featured on the screen at this time. You will be able to join the meeting by calling in on your mobile or landline phone. Please be sure to state your name and address. If you would like to make comments here in person, there is a mic, one mic to the side there, either side of the auditorium. Please be sure to state your name and address. Either side, thank you so much.
Thank you all for the presentation. First, as a point of order, before I start my comment, I'm the one that sent the email to Shamika Brown and Ms. Mallory. I'm surprised that the solicitor is wrong, but the procedures for board meetings is specific. It's August 24th of 2021, and members of the board tried to limit public comments, and that was defeated by a vote of the whole board. So anybody that's here or on the watching, you're cleared to talk about any issue related to school business. And that's, the appendix specifically addresses special meetings. So that's really clearly laid out. It's already been voted on. You can't just change that. So thank you very much. As far as my comments are concerned, I'm sorry, I'm Joe Rooney. I live in Ardsley. I actually live in the district. And I know there's a great thing where everybody wants a new house when somebody else is paying for it. But I'm actually one of the people, and I know the board members are also, I don't know how many other people here live in Abington or Rockledge, but I actually live here, and my parents started living here and built this building and built the high school and paid for everything else too. So just a real quick couple things is these are crazy numbers. We just sat through, I was with Dr. Fetcher and Dr. Melkor. There was a $200 million discussion that was held in the high school last year, and now we're up to $300 to $400 million. So we just spent $100 million, and board, you have a tough decision here with this stuff. It takes 25 years to pay that money off, and that was at a low interest rate, okay? And we pay a premium on the money that we borrow. With interest rates now at 7%, this money is crazy what you're talking about, and you're looking at paying it for 25 years into the future after I'll already be dead. In all honesty, after listening to these gentlemen, looking at a brand new F-150 and looking at a new Tesla, it doesn't seem so expensive all of a sudden. So I'd like to ask that there be two studies done. The first one is when I grew up here in the 60s and the early to mid 70s, I left in 76. We already educated 9,000 people in the Abington School District. So I hope we can have a study and say, how did we do that? And there was a comment before about the educational priorities now. I wish we had the priorities of the 1930s and 1960s and 1970s as far as education is concerned. There was a comment on it all comes down to space and money. Well, Tamar Kleiman made a comment about community engagement. Well, tax bills are getting to be paid in September. So that is actually our community engagement, is everybody starting the 29th of the month, I think is the date they've got to pay their school taxes, and we'll be doing that every year. So add another $300 million onto that and some of these numbers, and you're like, wow. Like I said, this is hard to look at, and it's serious sticker shock. Mm-hmm. Am I up?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for your time. Okay.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. My name is Allison Lalonde Wyant. I live at 2381 Oakdale Ave here in the district. I have a daughter at the middle school and a son at Copper Beach Elementary. And I'm so excited for this opportunity to rethink the middle school, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak about it in a vacuum tonight so we can focus on all of what's possible. I would rather think big, so if we think of those examples, that bill I'll pay for my school taxes is the happiest one in the pile. I mean, what else would I want to invest in besides my children's education and the future of this community? So if that bill goes up, I'm happy to continue to pay those taxes. When I think about those options, I don't know that refreshing the building makes any sense to me. I mean, not an option, an example at the lower end of the continuum. And I hope that when we have these community engagement sessions, there's an opportunity to talk about it a little bit outside of the vacuum as well, so that we could hear about the competing priorities a little bit more, so that when community members are faced with the idea of paying more in taxes, they can picture what this means for us compared to other investments that all of you on the board are considering. But this one certainly sticks out to me as exciting, so thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Len Zangwell. I live over in Glenside. My son is a rising 8th grader at Abington Middle School, so I'm fully aware that anything that does at the middle school will be long after he's out of the school, but I still think this is a great idea. I don't know what the answer is going to be, but I'm happy that the middle school and other buildings will hopefully be on a path to modernization. I happen to think that the tax bill I pay for Abington School District is a great deal, because my kid gets a great education. And there's no private school I know of that's anywhere near that in lowest of cost. And I moved here about 20 years ago. I didn't pay for those schools either. I benefited from them. So I'm happy to have very modern schools, because they really help the communities as large. I put in here, there's probably 300 people using various facilities. So I'm glad for this process. I'm looking forward to hearing more about various options. I'm looking forward to hearing more about these community engagement sessions and learning more about potential options and opportunities for not just the middle school, but other buildings also to be modernized and brought into the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kathy Spalding. I live at 1708 High Avenue. I've lived in the district for 27 years. A couple comments. Two things. When you have the community engagements, you mentioned something that happened in the school board meeting. You need to have at least one meeting on the weekend. Some people can't make it during the week, and this is too important. It needs to also be, everybody needs an opportunity to attend. You didn't really get into detail, the elephant in the room, the funding. First thing everybody's going to say is, okay, how much are my taxes are going to go up? I am very aware of what the taxes are in the community, more so than a lot of other people, because I'm a retired IRS revenue agent working out of Montgomery and Bucks County. In general, our taxes compared to other communities are not that high. However, you have other people, seniors that, that are concerned and whatever. Like I said, I've paid the taxes for 27 years and don't have any children. But I mean, it's for the good of the society. I'm not adverse to it, but I like to get more details so far as how much money we have on hand, what other savings can we do. It's just other factors that need to be discussed. All right, thank you.
Thank you. At this time, we'll move to our callers online. Mr. Sneed?
Yes, we have a caller, phone number ending in 1797. Please state your full name and address.
Okay. Hi, this is Tara Ng. I'm on Gregory Road in Abington. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay. First, I'd like to say thank you for holding this meeting and the presentation. I'm glad to see the process is underway, but looks like it's going to be a rather long process. So we're looking at approximately 5 years, and that's sort of on the low end. before a new building is ready for students or major renovations are completed. So I'd like to know what does the district plan to do for students in the middle school building right now and during the next 5 years? We can't ignore their needs, and it's clear from this presentation that they're not receiving an optimal education in this building. One quote from the presentation was, "There's an ongoing educational impact to running a modern educational program in a vintage building designed to deliver 20th century curriculum." So while this process is very important, the district needs to concurrently work on short-term improvements. For example, outdoor lunch to address lack of daylight in classrooms and the fact that the building is functioning over ideal capacity. It would give students a mental break and much needed access to daylight. One of the bullets under the HVAC section said exterior corridor layout limits classroom daylighting and causes distractions to students. And this is something that many parents brought up last year and were told no, but I hope the district considers that again. And another immediate problem is ventilation. While the air changes exceed the ASHRAE standard at the building level, there are many classrooms that don't meet the standard without the help of air purifiers. So I would like the district to also commit to consistently and properly running air purifiers in all the classrooms and common spaces that do not have 4 air changes per hour without that assistance. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sneed?
Next citizen for public comment is phone number ending in 5723. Please state your full name and address.
Hi, my name is Amanda Sinkin, and I live on Ruscombe Avenue in Glenside. I thought that the presentation was very helpful, as was the information about useful life and the fact that when systems are used past their useful life, you might have emergency costs to keep those systems going, or for repair costs, or for emergency replacement. I think it would be very helpful to know what some of those costs are, because a choice to replace a system is not a choice between spending money or not spending money. It can be a matter of how much you're spending and whether you can have budgeted for it within that year or not. So I think that would be very helpful to get a better idea to compare the two. I understand that it's unknown and obviously it would be a range, but I think it would be helpful to put in perspective that a decision to replace systems or not is not necessarily a choice between spending money and not spending money. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sneed?
Our next citizen for public comment is phone number ending in 0477. Please state your full name and address.
I'm sorry?
But we can hear you. We just need you to state your name and address. And if you have the meeting running in the background, if you turn that off, we won't hear it running on our side. Thank you so much.
Okay, great.
We can hear you.
Okay. My name is Autumn Konopka, and I live on Wharton Road in Glenside. One of the callers mentioned, one of the people that was there mentioned having the meetings at times on the weekend so that people could come. And it occurred to me that I think it would be a really good idea to also have opportunities, whether it's like video tours or actual physical tours, for people to move through the middle school and see what that building is actually like. Because especially for those people who did grow up in Glenside and went to that school, I'm not sure that you can fully appreciate how much of a disservice it's doing to our children without actually being in there. And I think that having that experience of walking through or seeing what it's like to be in that building might help people understand why we need better facilities for our children. And I just want to sort of piggyback on that and say that I think that the middle school has some serious behavior problems, which I think are partially exacerbated by being in a building that is decrepit. Like, your environment impacts how you feel about yourself, how you treat other people, how you treat the environment. And the middle school building is not a cared for building. It's not a building that feels like a warm and, a place that you want to take care of. So I think that students get in there and it can impact their behavior to be in that space. So I just think that making opportunities for community members to see the building itself can go along with all of these financial trade-offs, because there are sort of social, emotional well-being trade-offs as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Sneed, can you confirm that there are no other callers on the line?
That is confirmed.
Thank you. Are there any additional speakers within the room who have not spoken during this period? Okay. For my fellow board members, I just want to confirm that there are no additional agenda items to be brought up. All right, with that being said, we will move forward. Dr. Fetcher, are there any responses for you?
Sure. I'd like to address a few things. First, I want to express my agreement with the fact that when we do have public fora, that they are at multiple times, that fit multiple schedules, as in order to accommodate various working schedules. So I think that that is something that will be important moving forward, and multiple formats as well. I also agree with the idea that having opportunities for our public to come into our buildings and tour our buildings is appropriate, and a way to see what we discuss here, what we discuss on paper, to experience it and see what it is in person, because sometimes what it's on a chart or a picture taken does not paint a picture of the reality of the situation. In terms of ongoing needs of the district, we will continue to prioritize safety needs in the district, particularly when it comes to systems that are failing. We cannot wait 5 years to address specific systems within the district. We can't wait 5 years to address something that is falling apart or impeding on education itself. So it is a balance of what is essential at the time versus what is something that can be more of a long-term fix. I can give an example. When I was principal of the high school I can't remember the exact date, but somewhere around 2009, we were beginning to embark on an entire window replacement project within that building. And part of the concerns were there were some windows that we would want to replace immediately, but we had to look at what was a safety concern with those windows, what was aesthetically an issue, and balance that with, when you're doing a major project, you don't want to be replacing brand new things that you put in and invest in them. So these are the types of discussions. I'm not skilled in those areas of facilities, so I defer to what I refer to as the experts in there. So whether it's having engineers look at certain systems within the district, whether it's having architects look at specific areas of the building that may need being addressed, and also doing a cost-benefit analysis of that, but ensuring safety at the same time.
Thank you. At this time, we'll move into our second round of public comment. The phone number for public comment is featured on the screen behind me, 267-715-3717. You may call in on your mobile landline phone, or you may use the mics to the right or left of you. Please remember to state your name and address.
Hard to see everybody, but thank you again for both the presentation here and also for taking the time to let us know what's going on. Joe Rooney again. Three things. First, we just spent $100 million, borrowed most of it, and an unbelievably generous grant for part of it for the high school. It would be wonderful to get a study or some brief for the people of Rockledge and Abington as to what educational improvements we've gotten out of that $100 million that we've spent. It would be great if the board knew that and had it at the tips of their finger to say, we see a 5% increase a year, a 3%, we're doing whatever. There must be some metric we can use to say, here's the first 100 million before we spend 300 to 400 more million. That would be a wonderful thing to get some information on. There's some information that's come out, but I think it's important just to reiterate the taxpayers of Rockledge and Abington, we spend almost $24,000 per year per student right now, K through 12. So that's 13 years. If you multiply that out, right now we're investing $300,000 plus in the education, the primary and secondary education of our kids. And our tax bills right now are 100% consumed. So and again, we're going to maintain these buildings. In all honesty, my wife is 61 years old. She doesn't need replacement. She's firing on all of her cylinders. And these buildings have lasted. They've done a great job maintaining them. And the facilities department and the administration has to be saluted for that. And things do wear out. So that part of it was great. And just a little third point, for anybody that's interested, the lady brought it up, you can come in and tour the middle school right now. You just have to contact, it's already set up in school procedures. Just contact the principal or the administration, and they'll walk you through the building. They've been very generous and done it with me, and that's open to all citizens. So if you're not here or you're not kids in the school, you still can walk through it. Just coordinate it with the administration. They're happy to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are any other speakers within the room, there are mics to the left and to the right of you. Mr. Sneed, can you confirm that there are no additional callers on the line?
That is confirmed.
Dr. Fetcher?
I would like to say that that comment is correct. There is a procedure for visitations to buildings, and if someone is interested in doing that, they can contact the administration and we will follow the procedure. I do think that that is one option. I also think that having the opportunity for community to experience building and setting aside time for that is a process that I think we should pursue as well, in addition to what was discussed in terms of the visitation to the buildings.
Thank you. At this time, we'll have closing comments from my fellow board members. Mr. Allen?
No, thank you.
Ms. Frazier?
Thank you for your presentations.
Mr. Kay? I'm sorry. Mr. Kay?
Just thank you. That was really eye-opening. It's interesting to see the world in a whole different way. I appreciate how many residents spoke and their points of view. And again, you know, this is just the first step. So I hope you will actively get other citizens of Abington and Rockledge to get involved in this so that they know what's going on and have a voice, because it's you know, potentially, obviously, can change the entire community. Thank you.
Dr. Mowry?
I'd just like to add my thanks to the presentation. It was really great. And especially thank the residents who came out to speak tonight and to listen to the start of this process. I think it's going to be a long process. I'm hopeful that it's going to be a robust process. So the more people who engage with it, the better.
Thank you. Ms. Glasser?
Yes, to add to the thanks that has already been expressed, I'm also very grateful for this process, for getting this information. I'm excited that this is the beginning of a much longer journey to understand what our community wants and needs, and to have the data-driven approach that you mentioned to sort of surface some of the things that maybe become more obvious as we get that data. And on a personal note, having 2 young children in the district, it's exciting to think about the ways in which the district may continue to grow and thrive because of this initiative.
Mr. Muhammad?
Just looking forward to seeing this process begin and engaging in discourse with the community. Also having young children, 2 children in middle school today, who tell me what's going on and what they're experiencing, and 1 in 1st grade who may see some of the benefit of this work as time goes on. And so just looking forward to working with the community and continuing to provide high-quality education to the children of Abington and Rockledge.
Ms. Fazy?
Yes, I just want to thank you for all the attention to detail that went into this report. It's just, we're full, so many possibilities here, and I look forward to speaking with the community and hearing input as we embark on this process. It's definitely a process, and one that will hopefully serve students for a long time into the future, both my children and maybe someday their own. So I'm looking forward to this.
Dr. Kleiman?
I second all my colleagues' thanks, although at this point it's, overdone, but thank you nonetheless. Appreciate your time and appreciate you being here in an evening after I'm sure you all worked all day, so I know that that can be exhausting. I think that investing in our school district and in the students includes investment in their physical surroundings and the places where they learn and play and build relationships. And I think also investing in the workplace of the faculty and staff and administration of the district is also incredibly important. So I'm excited to embark on this journey. And I look forward to hearing more ideas from the community. Already tonight, I think we've heard a number of ideas that were new and innovative, and I just look forward to hearing more of them. So thank you.
Dr. Fetcher?
As I mentioned before, I'd like to reiterate that schools are the heart of our communities. And whether or not we have students attending those schools or not, they are what makes our community and the futures of our community strong. And I think that it is essential that this be, once again, a community process for that reason. And the benefits of our school systems go far beyond just educating students within the building, but also within the contribution to our communities. And I'd like to speak briefly about short and long-term goals. It's very daunting to take a look at what needs to be done in the next 10 years. When it's charted out, and I've had the experience of reading all these documents, and quite frankly, it is very difficult to sit and look and say, how are we going to do all this, and how are we going to address all these issues in the next 10 years? That's what keeps me up at night, and that's okay, because that's my job. But these are some long-term things that need to be addressed. However, we also have short-term needs, and I think that was expressed this evening, and I believe that that's also our role and administration here at the district to ensure that our students do receive top quality education in the best environments possible. And that is continuing to maintain our facilities the best that we can, working to correct problems that we have, that essentially may be long-term, we may need long-term solutions. But ultimately, I believe that it is my charge and the charge of the administrative team and all of us here at Abington School District to maintain high-quality education, and that will remain, regardless of this process, our mission and vision here in Abington School District. So I think it is essential that we know that student learning is our first priority and will continue to be our first priority, regardless of what process we decide to take and what decisions are made.
Excellent. In my final comments, I just want to reiterate some of the major points that we are not, we are at the beginning of the process and not the end, that this is a community-based process. We want to match the funds with the improvements that are needed and include a wide variety of stakeholders. And I do appreciate the comments that came in regard to making sure that these meetings are held at times where people who work can still attend, but not just in time, but also in location. So one of my hopes is that the meetings, as far as the community meeting, not necessarily the board, but the community meeting will actually take place in the community so that people have easier access to it. And of course, that can be discussed further later. With that being said, have a great evening, everyone, and congrats to your first day of school tomorrow for our teachers coming in.